As always, a huge thank you to Starboard, who are once again this season's main sponsors. Starboard has a history of innovation across water sports, starting in 1994 by revolutionising the design of windsurf boards, and they've brought that bang up to date recently, bringing foil windsurfing onto the Olympic stage with their IQ foil package. Starboard got behind stand-up paddleboarding in a huge way in the early days and continue to lead the industry to reduce their environmental impact. Their focus on innovation brought them 7 world champions at the ICF Worlds last year, and all of them were using their Lima paddle range. They continue to improve and innovate their boards and their paddles for all abilities across all flavours of the sport, including adventure. And you can find out more about Starboard through their website, which is linked to in the show notes. Welcome to the SUPfm podcast with me, Simon Hutchinson. Every week, I chat with interesting people from the SUP world, or to people who can help us, the paddlers of the SUP tribe, to improve and to maximise our own experiences and our love of both the sport and the water. Every episode is designed to inspire or to help you get a deeper immersion into the sport through my conversations with leading athletes, scientists, explorers, TED speakers, and New York Times best-selling authors. And not forgetting some of the many insanely inspiring distance paddlers we've routinely had on the show. This week I'm speaking to the winner of both the 2022 Carolina Cup and the winner of the APP Santa Monica event, April Zilg. If you've got any interest whatsoever in improving your performance in racing or just improving your life and your health, then you can't do any better than listening to April, who is the in-form athlete who is clean sweeping all the top race events this season. April has taken a scientific approach to her racing, which is a reason for her consistency. And in this conversation, we really get down into the weeds, into some practical approaches which will really help you, whatever your level. We also discuss her recent book, Athlete Agenda, which helps you to put together your own athletic preparation, whatever your sport or your event, because a one-size-fits-all approach is not the best way forward. I really enjoyed this chat where the world of training nerdery features very heavily, and that is a world I love to spend time in. During our conversation, we also took some predictably wide diversions where I learned all about the sex lives of seahorses, but there was plenty of chat about stand-up paddleboarding and training too. So I hope you enjoy my chat with the unbeatable April Zilg. Hey April, welcome back to SUPfm.
Hey, I am so stoked to be here.
Well, it's great to have you back, and also you're in a rich vein of paddling form at the moment. And I don't know whether you remember back to your previous appearance, but you were one of our first guests when we switched the podcast back on again after a 5-year gap in 2020. So I really appreciate your ongoing support for the show.
Everybody in the stand-up paddle industry is so phenomenal. And we're such a small niche sport as well. I definitely think a rising tide lifts all boats.
Absolutely. Well, I didn't get to speak to you last time. I think Nick chatted to you, but it's great that we can catch up, because since last time when you did the interview with us, the world was in lockdown. I think you'd just moved back to North Carolina from California. And since then, you've really taken a number of really big steps forward in your performance, not least the fact that you've now got 2 full clean sweep victories of the Carolina Cup, which I know was niggling away at you for a while and something that you've been competing in for years without getting that top step of the podium. So congratulations on that one. We're going to talk about that in a bit more detail a bit later on, because I know that that's a real passion. But for the benefit of those people who haven't heard your previous appearance on the show, and we'll link to that in the show notes, you've come an enormous way from discovering the sport 10 years ago. And you rather ungenerously refer to your old self as a couch potato before you took up paddling and got to where you are now in the SUP world. So just so that people can understand where you were and how far you've come. Just explain what drove you off the couch and made that huge change to your lifestyle.
It was a health scare. I hate to say that it wasn't my own internal motivators. Like it didn't come from within. It was a doctor telling me essentially a bad diagnosis that I didn't want my life to continue down that path. I realized that I had to make some really major changes. And I had tried things like running. I don't know who wants to do that for fun. Doesn't seem like paddling. Paddling was just the thing that I found because I needed a hobby in my life that I enjoyed enough to do frequently enough to keep me healthy. Because everything that I was reading about disease and poor health, like it all comes back to diet and exercise in 90% of the books that I'm reading and have read and continue to read. It's always about moving the body at the right intensities, strengthening the body, strengthening the mind, improving the mental outlook, and fueling properly with clean, healthy, from the earth foods. And that was the motivation. The motivation was to not die.
It's a pretty significant motivation. And you picked paddling. So, I don't enjoy running either. I've done quite a lot of it, unfortunately, but I've never enjoyed it very much. But you must have had some sort of love for the water already because you are a marine biologist and clearly spent a bit of time on the water. Just tell us about that love for the water and early connections with it.
Oh, definitely. I think my mother was in the water a lot at the local lakes and rivers when I was even just a baby inside her belly still. So some of my earliest memories are swimming, splashing around in the water. I've always been very drawn to water. I did go to obtain my undergraduate degree. I started as a physics major, but I transitioned over to marine biology with a double major in environmental science and environmental education. Because I wanted to be working in the marine environment outdoors. When I pursued my master's, I found myself in an office with no windows, no light, didn't see the light of day for about 50 weeks out of every year. And for 2 to 4, 2 weeks out of the year, I was at sea in the middle of December in the Atlantic, which if you've ever been in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean in December, it's gnarly out there. And I get very seasick on big craft, not on stand-ups or outrigger canoes, thank goodness. But I was drawn to marine biology because I wanted to be outside and I wanted to, raise awareness of the issues facing the marine environment. It wasn't what I thought it was going to be. And it was really ironic. The first few times I had entered paddleboard races, this is very superficial, but it's back when Facebook was kind of starting out. And I would post about a paddleboard race and it would get like 20 or 30 likes. But I would post about the research that I was doing and it would get 2 or 3. So that's like a factor of 10, the people I was reaching. So kind of in the back of my head, I said, oh my goodness, if I really want to reach people and educate them about doing more with less, living a more minimalistic lifestyle, kind of backing off from mindless consumerism and the things that are plaguing our society and impacting the marine environment and causing its degradation, I should probably paddle, not sit in this office anymore.
Actually, it's something that talked about with a lot of guests, and getting that environmental message over there through activities and doing something different and doing something innovative is a really effective way of doing it. So the first conversation I had about it was a guy up in Virginia called SUP Garbage Man who relentlessly goes out there on his huge, great paddleboard. I think he does the odd yoga pose just for a bit of social media exposure. Why not? But he collects all of this sort of stuff up. And I think we mentioned before we came onto this recording, just done an interview with Wallace J. Nichols, the author of Blue Mind, and he very much takes that approach as well. So, I mean, it's a shame that people don't engage necessarily directly, But I guess when there's a lot of grim stuff in the world anyway, you want to sort of try and get your messages across in a sort of less predictable way. So I couldn't help but ask this question, so apologies for this, April, but in your bio at one point you worked as a seahorse breeder. I'm pretty certain not everyone in the world can say that they've done that job. What did that involve?
Oh my goodness. I personally claim my title as a sexpert. Can you say that? That's not PC. No. No, it was phenomenal. I would have preferred to continue on the path, and done my master's in that and followed it up with a PhD, but it wasn't in the cards for me. I lacked confidence, and I let my advisor, when I went into my master's degree, talk me out of doing the seahorse research that I initially went back to do my master's. Like, that was the intention. And my advisor just happened to have loads and loads of footage and data on deep sea corals for me to work up, which was interesting. And it was a secondary interest of mine, but I did not pursue my passion, which was seahorses. But at the aquarium, I kind of like played some Barry White, set the lighting really good. And just every morning they mate for life. It's actually a beautiful story. So the males and the females, they wake up, like I said, set the music, set the lighting, and they wake up and they dance every morning together to kind of like reconnoiter that bond, just re-cement it, to be together. And the male, it's hilarious because the males get pregnant, totally still trying to figure out how to turn me and my husband into seahorses because I'm busy training and I would much rather just him carry it around. But the males, they wake up and they open their little pouch, under their door, like their anal fin. It's a technical term, right? But and they open it up and it looks like someone's opening a purse and like showing you. And he's like, "Hey, baby, look how big this opening is. You can fit tons of eggs in there." And she's like, "Yeah, I can. That's hot." And so she puts all her eggs in there. And for the next, couple of weeks, they grow and his belly gets insanely big. And he rolls around at a certain point, they're usually on the bottom of the tank. It's just so much. You can tell he's like laboring. He's just like, my goodness, carrying babies is tough work. And then before you know it, he spews them all out of there. And there's hundreds and hundreds of microscopic little teeny tiny seahorse babies all over the tank. So I would take the males out, put them into the birthing tanks. And then the birth would happen, and then I would remove them and put them back in the main kind of breeding tank with his lady friend. So,
wow,
dude, I loved it.
And obviously this isn't a seahorse podcast, but what happens? What happens next? Then do you put them out into the wild, or?
So there are different initiatives actually, because seahorse populations are declining. There are certain initiatives that would like to take the seahorses that are being bred in captivity and release them into the wild. The survivability, the ability of like captive bred seahorses to survive in the wild has not really been studied. That would have been part of my master's and PhD research that I never did. So that would need to be assessed, but it's believed to be pretty low. Furthermore, there's like certain diseases and genetic, like deformities that may occur when breeding in captivity, and there might be risk to releasing captive bred seahorses into the wild that could damage the native populations, the wild populations. So there's not really a program for that. But what my breeding at the North Carolina Aquarium at Fort Fisher did accomplish was I shipped my baby seahorses out to other aquariums that were members of the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. So like they're not for sale for like humans to have at their house, but other, vetted, responsible aquariums were able to send requests, and I would ship seahorses to them for their display in their various exhibits. And that prevented more seahorses from being extracted from wild populations.
Amazing, amazing. And I'm sure your paper about the effects of Barry White on seahorses is out there somewhere on PubMed or somewhere. So, Google is your friend on that one. So let's move from seahorses on to stand-up paddling. And you first paddled in 2011, and it's been quite a journey in less than 10 years to get where you've got. And I know that you've had to manage and adapt your approach to get there. So from getting from there to here, how did you start off your paddling journey? Did you get any coaching or instruction to start off, or are you all self-taught?
There was a lot of self-teaching, for worse, not for better. Like a lot of people, I was very budget limited. I did leave my job as a deep sea coral reef ecologist. I didn't work at the aquarium. I actually worked in a paddleboard shop so that I could paddle more often. When I got back from a year abroad in India, where I started paddling, I paddled there as well. But yeah, I didn't have the funding to hire like really good coaches. In hindsight, I wish that I had invested in something like that, because I think I could have accomplished my goals a little quicker. I came across some very helpful people along the path. Somewhere around like the 6-7 year mark, I met Johnny Puakea, and he's been really just helpful in sharing training plans and technique. And he'll analyze my technique still these days. And that's insanely helpful because I'm still working on it. Every year I change something. I know I do. But yeah, YouTube videos and then books. In the absence of funds, like I didn't have money, but I had time, especially like when I'm waiting for the paddleboard rentals to come check themselves back in. So I decided that I had this brain that I got this master's degree with, so I might as well use it at the same capacity. If I put the same effort that I put into my master's in something that was kind of like, that I was on the fence passionate about, what if I put that same effort and read the same amount of like materials and did the same amount of research for something that I was for me completely selfish and that I truly loved. And yeah, I've read so many books, but the most recent books have been the most helpful. I wish I'd read them first. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so we raised the prospect of some level of nerdery in this chat. So name some names there. What books spring out for you at the moment? The ones that you wish you read earlier.
The two that I wish I had read earlier were the Big Book of Endurance Training and Racing. It's the yellow one by what's his name? I just went blank. Anyway, and Training for the Uphill Athlete by Scott Johnson. And Scott Johnson's actually really accessible on his website, uphillathlete.com. When I need like some training advice every once in a while, I book calls with him. And yeah, so he's really cool and down to earth. He's really driving me nuts because I recommend the Big Book of Endurance Training and Racing to everybody. And I've literally just had a brain absent-minded moment.
Well, yeah, we'll link to that, but certainly it's through all of your website. You can see all the various different influences that you've got in there. And you mentioned about, use your brain, not for something that's a bit but something that you've really got a passion for. And you've obviously got that scientific mindset as well. So just tell me how that sort of manifested. Do you read? You read physiology and all of that stuff, or is it, is it the whole spread of stuff, testing whether things work or not and changing your approach accordingly?
Yeah. I mean, coming from zero background in nutrition, physiology, human anatomy, anything like that, it was more like do something for a year. I would always train a certain way for a year, give it an honest try. I would have a hypothesis. Hey, if I did all these CrossFit workouts all year, I'd be super fit and I would probably win all my races. Tested that hypothesis. That did not work. That was called overtraining. And, but But, every step of the way I failed. I failed for 10 years at the goals I had set for myself. And every time I failed, I said, okay, well, what part of that failed? And nutrition was a huge leap in my performance. So I signed up for the Precision Nutrition online nutrition course, and I took that and I read that book. What else? I talked to Larry Kane. He's an excellent coach as well. He's phenomenal, and he recommended for training plans to build those that I should read Block Periodization by Vladimir Shirin, which I still use to structure my training plans to this day. And then for strength training, which is vital, absolutely vital for paddlers. It has nothing to do with getting strong, even though paddling is a power endurance sport, and how much pressure you can apply to the blade 100% matters, especially in upwind scenarios. But it's more about teaching your brain to fire lots of neurons and activate more muscle fibers. So when we lift heavy, we're literally training the body to recruit more muscle fibers to lift a heavier weight. And in a nice, controlled, safe environment, then when we get out into the water, we're able to apply more power to the water. So my favorite book on that subject was, I think Strength Training for Sports, or Periodization for Sports by Tudor Bompa. And that one was really great because it sets out the phases of strength training and what order you should do them in throughout the season. Because a lot of people in paddling, I think, skip the maximum strength phase, which I think is the most important, not just for the recruiting of the muscle fibers, but to develop a strong and balanced musculature. I don't know if you're into Ross Edgley's books, but he really hammered home strength training for his paddle around the UK. Mm-hmm. And I cannot echo that with I'm shouting that from the rooftops. He's absolutely correct. When we pull something like our ligaments or our tendons, when we paddle hard in a crosswind or an upwind, it's because we didn't strengthen the organism properly. And furthermore, you have to do it in balance. So your push and your pull in each plane of motion has to be balanced, or else you'll pull your own skeletal system out of alignment. Mm-hmm. That's when we tweak something. I pulled a muscle. It's because your pull is so much stronger than your push, or vice versa. So in the gym, we balance that so that we prevent injury, so that we can do a repetitive motion like paddling with success and no injury.
And that's a pretty consistent rule, I think, with all levels of training. And we'll talk a bit about that in more detail. But I did want to ask you about your goals, because when you started paddling, what was there in your mind in terms of what you were going for? Did you have this grand goal of, achieving where you've got to now, or was it in increments, or was it just looking ahead at the next race? How did that work itself out?
I knew I wanted to take it to the top level, right? So I did start with some more vague goals, which when I work with my private clients, I try to get them away from setting goals that are too vague. Especially when we use the athlete agenda planner, there's a goal setting section. And it helps to have very specific, quantifiable, qualitative goals. So you can say something like, oh, I want to be a top paddler, but what does that look like to you? At the end of the day, we have to identify some race that we deem top paddler-esque. Furthermore, we would have to identify what are the competitive times for that kind of race? What skills are necessary to be competitive in that kind of race? So I couldn't say, I want to be a top paddler, and then if I won Chattajack, and it's a marathon distance flat water race, but I don't value if I don't value flat water, then that race wasn't important to me. I think I won that back in 2014 or 15. I don't know. But it's a phenomenal event. I love Kim and Ben. They put on an epic event, but it's just, to me, that didn't check the box, right? So it was always, Carolina Cup was always kind of my metric because you had to launch and beat yourself through the surf. So there's and you have to navigate the inlet. And then there's tides, there's current. So you have to be able to read water. You have to be able to set a strategy. You have to be able to handle yourself in the surf. And then you have to have the fitness to do the long, grueling grind section. So I just kind of saw that as the race that I identified a very well-rounded paddler. And I think that's why I set it as my goal. Not to mention it was my hometown race.
Well, that helps, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So just coming back to you doing more and more coaching, obviously we've got the athlete agenda, which we'll talk about again a little bit later on. But I kind of share a bit of the same characteristic with you in that, I've been paddling for 10 years as well. I do a bit of instruction, clearly not coaching to the same level that you do. But I think one of the advantages about coming to the sport, as it were, relatively late and doing it for a sort of concentrated period of time is that you can remember all of those stages that you went through. You're sort of properly aware of them. And I think that really helps when you're coaching people, because a lot of those problems that you're solving as an athlete, you can then help people out with when they're going through it.
Oh, yeah, I couldn't agree more. And for me to have realized my goal, even definitely like 5, 6, 7 years in, I was like, oh my gosh, this is never going to happen. Right. Like I definitely started losing steam and losing confidence. But I didn't, it was just every time I found another hole, like another thing that I was like, nope, I could change that. And if that doesn't work, then next year I'll quit. But then I would fix the one thing and I'd be like, oh wait, no, but there's this one more thing. And if I fix that, then I'll and it doesn't work, then I'll quit. And having worked through them all, I do think I have a lot to offer people in terms of coaching, because a lot of athletes were born athletes and they don't necessarily know why they're so amazing, and they are amazing. And I advocate in terms of like getting coaching or clinics. Anytime there's clinics at races, sign up for them. There's no like, oh, I signed up for hers, so I don't need to sign up for his. Sign up for every single top pros clinic at some point or another, because each one of them is going to explain essentially the same stroke, the same topics in a slightly different way. And you never know which one of them is going to resonate with you. And when I started paddling, I took clinics with every single paddler, like everyone that was doing a clinic. But yeah, I do feel like in overcoming all of the obstacles, I have a lot more tools in my toolkit to help other people overcome those exact same obstacles. And the last one, so I'll go off on a slight tangent here and tell you like the one that I think made the biggest difference, that I wish I hadn't waited so long to test or waited so long to, try, was the aerobic base work. And I don't know if you had seen, I actually bought a blood lactate meter to test my lactic acid levels when I'm paddling, because I wanted to be sure that I had my aerobic threshold like perfectly pinned for like an 8-month block of aerobic training. And sure enough, it was way lower than I thought it was. So for 7 years, I was training at too high of an intensity to yield the adaptations inside my body that I needed to reach that next level. I had fixed my nutrition. So you can say that it was the thing, but it wasn't really, because there was all the other things that I already did. But I do wish it was the thing that I did first, because I would have spent a lot less time doing like the under eating and the overtraining kind of scenario, which was a big time suck.
Absolutely. And you must be psychic, because that was the next section I was getting to, which is the aerobic deficiency syndrome, which you sort of referred to in there. And that certainly seems like that was a massive revelation. I mean, under eating, over going for that high intensity training rather than sort of grinding out the benefits of having a really good aerobic base. So could you just explain a bit more about sort of that anaerobic and aerobic and the importance of training both?
Yeah. So when I started training, I did a lot of training well above my aerobic threshold. Aerobic means with oxygen. So at or below the aerobic threshold, our body is utilizing mostly oxygen and fat as fuel. For every turn of the wheel, we get like 32 ATP. It's a very efficient energy system. When we go above that, like the higher we get above our aerobic threshold, the more anaerobic metabolism we're utilizing. We're always using a blend. It would be a misnomer to say that like you're doing all one or all the other. As humans, we're always turning both systems. We're always using a little bit of blood glucose, glycogen for the anaerobic style metabolism is always running, but I think you only get like 2 ATP for every turn of the wheel of that one, right? As a fast twitch dominant athlete, so you have your ectomorphs, your endomorphs, and your mesomorphs. Your ectomorphs are like your long, tall, thin, marathon runner style people. They don't weigh a lot. They're always very lean. They're predominantly slow twitch athletes, and slow twitch muscles are adapted to utilize more aerobic metabolism. So those people are just genetically more aerobically gifted, so to speak. Then you have your endomorphs, which like your very thick people. Like you look at a donut, you gain weight. You look at a weight, you put on muscle. I definitely have a lot of endomorph genetics in my body. But you can be an ectomorph on the top and an endomorph on the bottom. That's like the pear shape. You could be an endomorph on top, an ectomorph on the bottom. That's like the apple shape, to like quote all of these People magazine, I don't know, like these shapes that people identify as. So long story short, every single human body is different. We're all different. The best kind of luck you could get is that you're a mesomorph and you're kind of like a blend all over. So you're not an apple or a pear. You're just like ectomorph, endomorph, fully blended. Yeah, the whole way through. So knowing that realizing later that I was somewhat of a natural endomorph, if you look at my family, it becomes evident that I come from a long line of endomorphs. I realized that my slow oxidative fibers, my slow twitch muscles, were probably the thing that was limiting my performance. So every time I went out to train, just straight off the dock or straight off the beach, I go out and I set an intensity that felt comfortably hard for me, and I would warm up. And that would normally get my heart rate into like the 150s, 160s, right? And every workout to me, I felt like I had to get my heart rate as high as it could possibly go. And I had to hold that for as long as humanly possible, because in my mind, that's what the other racers were doing. I'm like, well, their heart rate's really high and they're going really fast. So my heart rate was really high, but I was going really slow. I just assumed that my speed would come, but I would train like at the intensity that I wanted to race at. And in discovering that literally nothing could be further from the truth, I dialed things back and I started training my slow oxidative fibers. So lactic acid gets a really bad rap, right? Like people say, oh, it builds up in your muscles and it burns, and that's what causes you to slow down. It's actually the hydrogen ions that are released along with the lactate, with the lactic acid, that slow you down. The lactate itself is used as fuel in anaerobic metabolism. So by going out and training at slightly too high an intensity all the time, my fast twitch muscles were just gobbling up glycogen and lactate every session. And I was continuing to train that system, which already worked fine in me. My body was very inefficient at utilizing fat and oxygen and going at any speed, like faster than like a crawl. So when I tested my aerobic threshold with a blood lactate meter, the generally like accepted level for the aerobic threshold is around 2.5 millimoles of blood lactate per liter. my aerobic threshold was down around 145, which means anything above 145, I was injecting my system with enough lactate that my muscles could burn that as fuel and they would not need to rely on aerobic metabolism. When I then ran out of glycogen in a race, you have to slow down, like insanely. You slow down so much, and because your body's not efficient as a slow twitch athlete. So I spent an entire year training essentially right at 145. And I just wouldn't go over it. Thank good, because of the the pandemic. I didn't really have a lot of places to go. So because that happened, I was able to train right at my aerobic threshold, and I brought that up to 165. So on the outside, I look the same to people. Like I'm going the same speed at 165 that I was before, but inside my body is utilizing oxygen and fat at a higher percentage than lactate and glycogen. So that means I have ups now that I didn't have before. So like before it was pinned, you can't, you're just all out the whole race, barely holding on. So now at that same intensity, I have some ups and I can bring it back down. So I still have anaerobic metabolism to burn, to catch a train, to catch a wave, to like drop somebody or try to catch up to somebody. You can start playing the game and having fun racing with strategy versus just, oh my God, this is so awful. And it's been night and day, just absolutely night and day. And my health is vastly improved.
Well, that's amazing. And going through your YouTube channel, as I did, I noticed, I think you were just testing the hypothesis at some point, but and you and your OC1 and your outrigger canoe. And I think it was about 5 weeks after you had started to do it. And luckily you stuck with it because you got to the end of your run. And I don't know where you were paddling, and you looked a little bit annoyed, but luckily you stuck with it because you did work it out, because your frustration came from the fact you'd been training this way for so long. And then after 5-6 weeks or whatever it was, you ended up being 3 minutes longer. But then you figured out actually you had a massive headwind and you had to make loads of different adaptations. So, if you'd done it via your old training system, you'd have been miles behind.
Yes. And I actually have scheduled for release in the next few weeks an update where I am doing the exact same time trial. There's going to be 2 separate videos, one now at 145, or 148. So the same heart rate from that video, which is now well below my aerobic threshold. But I want to show that the slow twitch muscle fibers have become more adept at applying pressure, even at that lower intensity. So the 2 videos will show that even at 148, I'm faster at 148 than I was at 148 a year ago because of the muscular adaptations to the slow twitch, the slow oxidative muscle fibers being stronger. Then there's another video where I'm at my new aerobic threshold, which just shows yes, obviously I'm at a higher heart rate, so I can apply more pressure. But at my new aerobic threshold, what is my time now that I've moved that? But still burning predominantly oxygen and fat as fuel and keeping that anaerobic metabolism in check just until that final 500, 200 meter sprint.
This is the SUPfm podcast with my guest, April Zilg, and we'll be right back. As always, a huge thank you to Starboard, who are once again this season's main sponsors. Starboard has a history of innovation across water sports, starting in 1994 by revolutionising the design of windsurf boards, and they've brought that bang up to date recently, bringing foil windsurfing onto the Olympic stage with their IQ foil package. Starboard got behind stand-up paddleboarding in a huge way in the early days and continue to lead the industry to reduce their environmental impact. Their focus on innovation brought them 7 world champions at the ICF Worlds last year, and all of them were using their Lima paddle range. They continue to improve and innovate their boards and their paddles for all abilities across all flavours of the sport, including adventure. And you can find out more about Starboard through their website, which is linked to in the show notes. Now for the rest of my conversation with April Zilg. It's really interesting because people talk about the psychology of racing, but it's also the psychology of training, because I guess what you were doing with your high intensity stuff is a real like no pain, no gain. It's got to hurt in order to get some benefits. But then when you're doing that lower level aerobic training, it's a bit more gentle and it takes a bit longer, and it's probably not as exciting as doing that high intensity stuff, but it's just dialing things down and being pragmatic about your training approach.
Yeah, it's definitely not as exciting. And I think a lot of people struggle to justify setting aside the time each day to do something that feels so boring and it feels like you're not getting a whole lot out of it. But when we train that no pain, no gain mentality, when we train literally from a place of fear, we're training with our sympathetic system. So our autonomic nervous system is divided into the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Most people know that as sympathetic is our fight or flight response, and our parasympathetic is kind of that rest and digest response. And science is very clear on this. When we are in a sympathetic state, when we are training because we're fighting to stay in front, or we're fighting to catch up, or we're fleeing because there's people catching us, we're trying to stay out, like we're going to stay ahead of them, or we're fleeing just from work. Enough of today. I'm just going to go out and hammer to get away from work. Everything we're doing is again with this sympathetic state, and we are suffering as a society and as athletes from this sympathetic upregulation of that system. And when we are in that mental state, we do not see gains. We do not see adaptation to our body, because every calorie that we eat from the food we consume is being routed because our brains have identified a threat. We are fearful. We are scared. And so all our calories are just, like run away, catch up. I'm a loser, like, or whatever it is we're thinking. And none of those calories are now going to build the organism. So when you dial it back and you start to train from a parasympathetic state, a rest and digest state, a deep breathing state where you're taking these deep breaths, lots of oxygen, every once in a while, you're not trying to go slow. You're trying to push the speed as hard as possible. I actually, next Thursday, my YouTube, it's scheduled right now, my mile repeats. You can watch me do my aerobic mile repeats on YouTube. But you want to push the speed to the max it can go before you feel that like urge to breathe. So when you like out of your mouth, when it starts getting a little hard, you can take a big dump, a big exhale. Sorry, you take a big dump. You want to edit that one out. Sorry, I made myself laugh. Okay, a big CO2 dump is what I meant to say. So a big forceful exhale is going to rid the body of CO2, and it's going to lower that heart rate. The heart rate lowers in response to the lower CO2 levels. So you're going to stay focused enough to push the speed, but be playing with your brain in ways to keep the heart rate down and keep it in the right location. Because when we're in that parasympathetic state, that's where the magic happens. When we're training from a parasympathetic place, the calories from the food we eat, then they come in and they go and they make new body parts. They're not evading a threat anymore. They're not, going to, like just this run away, this catch up. You're going to build new body parts. You're going to build new capillaries. So when we're in that parasympathetic state, our body goes, oh, hey, we're moving. You know what would make this a lot more efficient is if I had more blood vessels, so that with every beat of my heart, every time it squishes, more fuel, more blood, so more fuel carrying more oxygen and more fuel gets to each individual muscle fiber. And that adaptation is going to take a couple of months. But after those couple of months, now all of a sudden your muscle fibers are getting more fuel, more oxygen to, and more waste away from the muscles. The muscles go, we got a lot of stuff coming in here. We need to build up the infrastructure to handle the influx of more fuel and more oxygen. And what your muscles are going to do is make more mitochondria. Ding, 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 powerhouse of the cell. What's making the ATP? The mitochondria. The more mitochondria you have, the more work you can do. And if you are not eating enough, your body is not going to build these new body parts. And B, if you're training at too high an intensity where it's just using it to all the time, you're never going to build these new body parts, and you're never going to become faster, and you're never going to be a better racer.
Absolutely. It's all about teaching your body that what the training that you're doing is normal. It's not a panic situation that you just need to get through. This is normal. I'm just going to build up the resources in order to support that. I think the other opportunity there's a couple of other little games you can play. One is the form of your paddling as well. Because if your heart isn't pounding out the top of your head, then you can really concentrate on your form. And also, if you're up for a bit of meditation practice, that's all good as well. So there's lots of things and lots of games you can play while you're doing it. But as you say, it's kind of investing the time and not really going to this no pain, no gain approach, which has always been like a traditional way of doing things. But I'm sure it works for some people. But yeah, I'm with you on that one. You just have to build your base up and be pragmatic about what works.
Yeah. And I mean, the no pain, no gain, it does work for about 6 weeks. It elicits the adaptation more quickly. And that's why it's so glamorous, because you do it for like a week or two and you instantly see improvements. But because all of the, like I said, all that fuel is going into just the activity and not building the organism, you're lucky if you just kind of burn out and fizzle out first. The worst case scenario is that you actually become injured because, again, your body's not utilizing the calories, the fuel that you're eating to build your muscles, to build your capillaries, to build your ligaments, to build your tendons. It's just going into evading the threat. And that's when you feel that like overuse injury, that's an indication that you've definitely been training for a little too long. So, or at too high of an intensity for too long.
I mean, it's a fascinating area. And, endurance, had the experience marathon running. I'm an ex-rugby player, and doing endurance sport isn't suitable for my frame. I don't think really, or certainly not running. And my real step forward, seeing as we're getting into book recommendations, is a book called Chi Running. If anyone out there does fancy doing a bit of running, it's by a guy called Danny Dreyer. And it's all about working with the natural movement of your body ergonomically in order to sort of move forward, rather than what I was doing, which is just a sort of extension of my sprinting style, and ending up, when you go longer than 10 miles, you end up doing yourself a bit of damage. So yeah, it's all about sort of being kind to yourself and easing up, really. One subject I wanted to talk to you about, and again, another common one in my conversation with athletes, is cross training. And I know you've done a lot of CrossFit. It sounds like it didn't work out quite as well as you were hoping, but it seems that the OC1 single outrigger canoe is something that you use really effectively. So how does that help your supping?
It keeps my heart rate a lot lower when doing training. Stand up is inherently a higher heart rate activity because it's body weight supported, and I'm driving through the legs. I'm still driving through the core and the lower body in the outrigger canoe, but stand up is just that much more intense. I'm like literally like throwing my weight like this kettlebell swing with the lower body every stroke. And it keeps the heart rate higher, keeps the stress on the heart just that much higher. And I think just me training at a lower intensity, because I do have such a strong anaerobic system, my fast twitch muscle fibers and my fast twitch system it's a lot. If I train it a little, it'll take over. So by forcing my heart rate to stay a little bit lower in a seated position, I'm definitely able to prevent overtraining, and prevent the release of too much cortisol into the system. Because that's the other really negative byproduct. You're like, oh, well, anaerobic metabolism, when I do anaerobic training, it shows results really quick and I get faster, better, and I feel it and I see it. Why wouldn't I do it all the time? Because the byproducts of anaerobic metabolism are really damaging to the body, like high cortisol and just kind of throwing off your hormones. And as a female, that's not good. Like we like normal hormones. Yeah, but running as well. So I do actually run. I mean, I hate it, but I do it because it's a necessary evil. And I find that between running and outrigger canoe, those like really shore up imbalances on either side from stand up.
So let's say that your running shoes are locked away. You haven't got access to any form of paddling. And if I was to restrict you to one particular exercise to try and maintain your health and your strength, I mean, you mentioned kettlebell there, pull-ups, all of that sort of stuff. What's the one exercise that you would utilize just to keep yourself ticking over if you absolutely had to in this very artificial situation?
Are very artificial. So when you say one exercise, you mean like one movement, or do you mean like just going to the gym? Could I say strength training?
No.
You mean one movement?
Yeah, just one thing, one go-to exercise that whole body type thing. Is there any? I'll just what's been recommended to me is the kettlebell swings.
I do like kettlebell.
So that's a sort of whole body exercise. You got a bit of weight on there. You got the aerobic and anaerobic in there, and it sort of roughly fits the sort of the paddling movement. Other people have talked about pull-ups being one because again it's talking about SUP as a sort of pulling rather than a pushing exercise. So is there anything sort of in that area that you would kind of go to?
I like all of those. I was going to say if it has to be a compound or a simple maneuver, because I really like overhead snatches. So the bars on the ground and your arms are out wide and you're pulling, so you pull it up and then you receive the bar overhead. So you have to slow down the movement and like it's kind of like it's almost training the push musculature, but you can catch it in a squat position. So it requires an insane amount of core. It's probably one of my favorite like compound maneuvers.
There you go. Fantastic. Great stuff. I'll be practicing. And of course it sort of exercises the back as well as the front. Sometimes there's imbalances and so on. So that kind of talks to your training approach you mentioned. When you chatted with Nick, you talked about something which I love talking about, which is sort of cold water therapy. And you talked about an interesting thing that I hadn't heard before, which was around reducing inflammation through cold water, and that you want to do that if you're on a multi-stage competition, but you don't want to do that if you're just general training, because inflammatory response kind of helps you to build muscle and strength and so on. So I hadn't heard that one before. And obviously cold water training also helps to habituate yourself to cold water shock for events like heavy water and so on. But you also mentioned about breath control and hypoxia, and I just wondered what you do in terms of your everyday training in order to sort of utilize that, because there's a lot about nose breathing and holding breath while you're paddling. How do you use that when you're out? Do you have a sort of particular system or set of exercises you follow?
No, I'm not very disciplined in the regards. I do my aerobic paddles where I'm breathing through the nose. And like I said, I'll do the CO2 exhales to keep the heart rate in check. I do utilize like cold showers and cold water therapy, but more for the mental training aspect. It's not, and I never pair it to blunt inflammation or to slow down my body's adaptive responses. I try to make sure I'm a nose breather all day. And in the age of COVID, most people that I know that got COVID are mouth breathers. Like I hate to say that, like close your mouth. There's all these little cool hairs and things in there cleaning and filtering. Shut it up. There's another really good book, by the way. Was it So the Oxygen Advantage,
Patrick
or
McEwen, isn't it?
yeah, that one was really good. And he talks about in indigenous cultures, there's like the mothers will, like if their babies are breathing out of the mouth, they'll close it. And if that gets bad enough, they'll like tape it shut because they want to train their baby to make sure it's a nose breather because it's just so much more desirable. So just throughout my day-to-day practice, I do deep breathing. Like if I'm chopping vegetables in the kitchen, weeding my garden, I'm just doing deep parasympathetic inhales and exhales. I sometimes I do square breathing. When I have allergies, I do like that lion's breath or like those forceful breathing. So I have a book on pranayama, and every once in a while I'll just flip through that and find something that, you know, suits the ailment that I currently have. But it's not like a structured discipline practice. It's more intuitive, and it's more, just kind of whatever I need at a given moment. I guess I also play, like, for no one else to hear, I sing really loudly in the shower and also in my living room. So I do, in theory, like I'm doing a lot of breath work when I'm singing really loudly. And I think it actually does help. So I take like big inhales so that I can hit notes or hold them for a certain amount of time. So much to my cat's dismay.
And that also, so we're getting right into the nerd zone here. So that also helps to sort of exercise the vagus nerve, which is another sort of parasympathetic skill that you can build up. But anyway, that's probably for another discussion. So let's move on to, well, first of all, who's interesting you at the moment in terms of maximizing your physiology? So you mentioned the breathing book. Who do you think is sort of doing interesting sports science work, or are there any areas that you're looking at the moment?
Actually, I mean, I really like Huberman right now. Is it Andrew Huberman? I love everything he's doing. My husband's really into like sleep hygiene right now. I don't use an alarm clock anymore, and we keep like all electronics out of the bedroom area and sleep pretty cold. And I think that, I mean, that's helped a lot with things like just recovery and in general. Like I just wake up, I pretty much wake up at the same time every day. It's between 5:30 and 6 naturally, but I don't set an alarm because if my body needs extra recovery, I sleep in as long as like I don't have any meetings scheduled, obviously within reason. The other one that I feel like I've kind of known intuitively for a few years, but there was a really good guest on Rich Roll's podcast recently, and the gut microbiome and the importance of fiber and vegetables and whatnot in our diet. And I have a 13-year-old boxer named Kaya. She's got her own Instagram, by the way. So Kaya, the boxer, she's ancient for a boxer, and I feed her mostly vegetables. She's a carnivore, so she gets meat, but I save all my table scraps, like all my vegetable table scraps, like the stalks on broccoli, the butts off of Brussels sprouts, little ends off of asparagus, and I save it in a thing all week. And at the end of every week, I boil it down with some barley, some peanuts, some blueberries, and a chunk of meat, and she eats it all week. And she's like running around like she's a puppy. And I was like, vegetables. Vegetables are good for us. But yeah, so I think emerging science is just supporting that it's not that we're digesting the vegetables. It's that we eat tons of foliage and greenery and vegetables, and that feeds the intestinal fauna. And when they are well fed and they are happy, they're able to digest your food more fully, and you are able to extract the macronutrients. Obviously, you're getting a higher percentage, like transfer rate of what you're intaking, what your body is able to utilize. But furthermore, the micronutrient availability, the bioavailability of those things is greatly enhanced when you have happy little gut microbes. So yeah, I'm very interested in like just the microbiome and the health of our gut right now.
Yeah, there's a guy called Tim Spector, who's a UK chap. I don't know whether he was the one who was on Rich Roll, but but he's written a lot of really interesting books about that. But there's a lot of people doing work in that area. And obviously we know if we're feeling tension, then our stomach reacts to that. But also, talking about the gut biome and so on, I think we produce more serotonin in our gut than we do in our brain. So it's like a second brain, I think they call it. And obviously the more diverse, the better. Let's get back into SUP.
Dude, I was going to say, that's really interesting about the serotonin. I'm going to have to look that up because when I eat green stuff, I'm way happier.
Yeah. I mean, it's all fermented foods and all of that sort of stuff. Kimchi.
Dude, I make sauerkraut and I make kimchi. Homemade. Yeah. Back to stand up.
All of that. Right. There we go. So Carolina Cup, real passion. We've mentioned it already. And 2021, it was the only APP event on the calendar. It was pretty much the only sort of high profile race out there. It was on your doorstep, and it was a race that you've had a real passion for. So you mentioned a bit about, what makes it special to you, because there is a whole mix of different skills that you need in order to succeed there. But normally the race is held in April. This one was in November. The conditions were a little bit different from normal, weren't they?
Just a little. No, they were normal for November.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was pretty gnarly to say the least. And I think in the graveyard race they restricted the length of that. So just talk us through that success, because it was a bit of an epic race, wasn't it? You were behind and then you managed to get over the line in first place.
Yeah, so the U.S. Coast Guard ended up saying that we were not allowed to go in or out the inlets. So that's why the course was modified. And so we ended up doing the 9-mile blockade runner course that is normally a part of the Surf to Sound Challenge in November. So I am familiar with the race course. We've done it, like just a handful of times. And I started the race kind of like leading, thinking, okay, yeah, this is going to be a great year. And it was a king moon, like high tide. It was insane. There was a full moon, there was a king high tide, and all the islands that you normally are going around, they all disappeared. Everything was underwater. So everybody's like making these beelines across the marsh, and I did not pick the right fin to shed weeds. And I picked up a big old blob, and I'm swishing and I'm bouncing and I'm trying to clean my fin off, and it wasn't cleaning. And I watched the other girls just pull away, and I was like, yep, this is my life. This is like the thing. I'm never going to win this race in a million years. Like, I've just wasted the last 10 years of my life. My self-talk was abysmal. I was pretty, if anyone else talked to me that way, like, you'd think they were crazy, but obviously because it's just me in my head, I was really letting myself have it. So it never occurred to me that I was going so slowly because of the reeds and all of the Spartina alterniflora actually was what was stuck to my, just to bring that back. I know exactly what was on my fin. And I was like, yeah, I'm not a distance paddler. I'm not good at this. And eventually I cleared the reeds, and in my mind, the damage had already been done. It didn't occur to me that without the reeds, I would be moving substantially faster. But I was. And then it was the same thing that I love about the long course came into play in the shorter course, because there's a big like 4-way intersection of tide, and it was coming out. So it's coming like out of Banks Channel, which we were about to head up. It's coming out through Masonboro Inlet, and it was going out on the backside of Masonboro Island where we were. And so when I saw the other girls that were decently in front of me at that point, I saw them kind of go straight into the 4-way intersection, and they got pushed so aggressively by the tide. And then the wind was in our face too at that point. And it, like, every once in a while, there was like a 30+ mile an hour gust, and you're like, I'm done. Like, I don't want to do this anymore. But sure enough, like if you look at it, there's an eddy on the side that I was on, and then there's an eddy on the opposite side of the outgoing tide. And I knew they were there. So what I ended up doing is hugging the shore before the intersection. So I got into the first eddy. It looked like I was making a wrong turn up Masonboro Inlet, but I rode the eddy, which made me go faster than I could go with my own power, into that eddy. And then I just stayed straight while the tide pulled me out, and like it corrected me to where by the time I crossed the tide, I essentially like ferried across like a whitewater move. I ferried across straight into the other eddy. So it was like an eddy, a slip, and an eddy. And I blinked, and they're like, I was right next to them, and I was like, oh my God, that worked.
Local knowledge.
I was absolutely in disbelief. But those eddies were swirling fast. So every time I crossed the eddy line, I had to like set my rail because it would grab my fin. And like, because it gets swirly because half of your board's like going this way now and the other half's still not in the eddy yet. So like it was really gnarly. It wasn't a stable route. It was definitely a hard route to stay on your board, but it was the faster route.
Incredible. And all of that study about water patterns and movements and experience, around that area. I mean, it sounds like it's got everything going on in all directions at all times, pretty much.
Dude, it was crazy. And hold on, I definitely, since you said Tristan Gooley is a cool guy, I'm going to have to call him and be like, hey, man, I liked that. I did read that How to Read Water book before that race. I mean, I already knew about those eddies, but I was just super, it was just really fresh in my mind because I had just read that book. So
yeah, that's awesome. It's awesome. So, so you didn't just win the distance race there, did you, April? You won the sprint, the technical as well. And that was also a little bit gnarly as well, wasn't it?
That was really gnarly. Yeah, that was big. It was cool though. It was super fun. Like I said, I did a vlog on YouTube of the event because I did like the turn so wide, and like to most people on the beach, they'd be like, why does she look like a kook? I'm like, yeah, you come out here and try to turn around that buoy when it's blowing 30 miles an hour and the longshore drift is like, you fall in, you're going to be 100 yards down the beach. I was like, I'll just turn like I'm a second day stand-up paddler and make it around dry.
Yeah. Well,
no shame in that game.
No, absolutely. You got to be pragmatic about these things. So you won that race. So I mean, how did that feel? You got 10 years worth of paddling. You had a DNF on your first Carolina Cup race, and you worked your way gradually all the way up, and then first opportunity, your home race. How did that feel?
Because it was the modified course in November, I hadn't felt like I had done it yet because it was the 9 mile. And like it just didn't feel like I did it yet. That's all. Yeah. I wasn't unhappy.
A-type personality, I'm suspecting here, April. I mean, you finally hit the straps on this one. You've done it, but then you put that right this year, didn't you?
Yeah. So this year it feels like I did it. I'm done now. I did it. Like we're good. It was the graveyard. We launched through the surf. We went downwind in the ocean. We had to surf in through Mason's Inlet. The tide was insanely favorable this year. So there was definitely strategy with where you made your move or didn't make your move with regards to the tide. So this year it feels like I did it. So I'll claim it now. Like I'm happy now. I'm done.
Well, we're all glad.
Career complete.
Well, not quite, because racing obviously is being switched back on this year. APP's got a decent program this year, and this might not be right, but I hear a rumor that you might be joining us in London for the APP. Is that right?
That is correct. It's on my schedule right now. The weekend before is actually the World VAA Sprint Championships. So I will be vying for hopefully a podium medal position in the VAA Outrigger, one person all out 500-meter sprint. So that's the big goal that I'm going to London for. It just so happens the APP is going to have their week just the very next weekend. So I was like, oh yeah, I'll just stay and hang out and do some APP stuff.
Amazing. And you competed in London before, haven't you?
I have.
How was your last experience?
Learning a lot about training and overtraining in myself. That was one of those races where I had done, I think, the Wild Buffalo Relay, which is a 42-mile crossing from Catalina to Newport. Then I had done the Carolina Cup, and I can't remember, I think it was after I did the 100-mile race from Chico to Reading. I'm not sure, but I was really tired. And I was like, no, I can do this. So that race did not go as well as I had hoped. But like I said, I'm definitely learning a lot more about how to not overtrain and not overcook it. So I should be much more rested coming into this event in London this year.
Excellent. Well, we look forward to seeing you up there. And the route isn't bad, is it, along the Thames? Did you get a chance to look up at all and see some of the landmarks?
I did. Big Ben was under construction.
Oh.
It was all covered up. So I'm very excited to get back.
Amazing. And what about the rest of the tour events? The Korean races look pretty tasty. Are you taking part in all of those?
It's currently on the schedule. We'll see. As with any international travel, just right now costs seem to be skyrocketing. Mm-hmm. So only my budget will determine whether I attend or not. So it's all about the budget.
Well, it is, isn't it? At the moment, times are tough. So just coming back.
Oh, I was like, which means buy an athlete agenda.
Well, funnily enough, I was coming straight to that. So coming back to coaching, you've put the hard work in. You've come from couch to the form of your life. You've experienced a bunch of training obstacles that you've had to work out and resolve. And you've done this all within a relatively tight time period of 10 years. So you've really gained all of that knowledge and an approach that works. So tell us a bit about how we can all benefit from Coach Zilg. It would be great to hear about, your coaching and opportunities people have got to actually harvest some of your knowledge. And the athlete agenda is something which is out there now. It looks like a beautiful piece of work. So you've got a bit of art as well as the sort of utility on it. It looks like the sort of resource that you wish you'd had when you'd started paddling. Would that be a fair assessment?
That would definitely be a fair assessment. There is something about getting very clear with your goals and your why. Simon Sinek, the book Find Your Why, very good one, applies to athletes as well as entrepreneurs or business people. I find actually most books written for business professionals are great for athletes and vice versa. Because what I'm finding like with my clients and what I did find with me is that like I said, that slow, boring work, we tend to skip it in favor of the more glamorous workouts. I noticed that when the month pages on my agenda, like on my schedule, when they were really consistent, when they looked really pretty and organized, like when just my planner looked beautiful and well filled out, my performances were better. So that discipline for me to sit down every day and write, today I'm going to work on my catch. Today I'm going to develop my aerobic capacity, like being clear on what systems I'm lacking and just focusing myself before the session. So I made sure I got the most out of it. And then coming home and reflecting in like my wins section and saying, oh, hey, I did this good or I did this bad. Like today I blew out of my zone and I wasn't supposed to, but there was this really sick boat wake. So, you end up having this conversation with yourself. And then when you either perform well or don't at your race, there's evidence, there's data, there's, hey, did I neglect my nutrition? Were there signs of my performance declining before I even got to this event? Because for a lot of us, our subjective scores, just writing down our subjective scores every day, like, hey, today I feel on, today I feel flat, today I feel springy, today I feel lethargic. Those feelings that we have are clues into our body's readiness to train, and kind of like our recovery status and what we're getting out of it. And if we can keep that record somewhere, like, we're going to benefit more from our training. And the reason I didn't do the athlete agenda as something digitally, I made it just a handwriting thing, because again, the science is very clear that writing it down, it's called encoding. So when your eyeballs see your hand writing on the paper, it encodes it deeper into your mind, into your brain. So the recall is better, and the neurological pathway is it's more cemented. So say you're in a high stakes situation in a race, and if you've recapped about your training, like, hey, in a race, I'm going to reach further and apply more pressure. And that's something you would write to yourself in your agenda. When the time comes to do that in a race, you're like 80% more likely to do it because you wrote it down and told yourself you're going to do it. When you just get off the water and you F off after your session, it's like, I didn't write down anything. You're not going to improve. So I harp a lot on the aerobic development, but in all honesty, that goes hand in hand with reflecting, like taking the time to set intentions for the workouts before them and reflect on them afterwards, I think is just as important, if like not, it's just as important as the aerobic base. It can't be understated.
Absolutely. And you're right about that, writing it down, because, I love digital bits and pieces, but, just recording a memo, I must do this next time, you're not going to listen to that again, are you? Whereas if you're writing it down, you're watching it, putting it down, it sort of makes a bit of an imprint. So even if you don't look at it again, you've got more likelihood that you're going to remember it. I use a system called the bullet journal, which is another sort of reinforcing type methodology. But I think it's a fantastic resource, and it's a nice looking. It's a beautiful thing. I think the other thing is that you're going to be more likely to use something like this if it looks nice and it feels nice when you're using it, and you've got all of the sort of inspirational phrases and prompts and so on in there. So it looks like an absolutely awesome piece of kit. I know I'm preaching to the choir here. Don't have to persuade you on that one. And, what other things are you working on at the moment? Where else can we harvest your coaching skills?
Dude, I've got tons of things going on at any given time. And I have price points for all budgets, because harken back to my story that I did not have these resources when I started paddling, and I really wish I did. For $5 a month, you can join members.theathleteagenda.com. And that's it's one of those mighty networks. So if you have questions about board shape, your technique, your training, like anything in the world, filling out your agenda, it's there. Like, you can join that. And we're having really cool conversations about nutrition, kind of roadblocks, reasons we're not training or not getting our training in, ways that we're creatively overcoming those. Got a good community with about like 40 active members right now. And we're talking all about paddling. It was supposed to be like the athlete agenda group, but inherently all we talk about is paddling. Maybe one day it'll evolve. A jump up from that, I've got inside there, it's called the Punk Paddlers group. And a punk is kind of that, it's a demographic of people who want to do it themselves. So if you want to read all the books that I've read, build your own training plans, or maybe you're a coach who wants to learn how to coach other people better and build training plans. You don't want anything done for you, but you just maybe want more specific guidance on how to do it yourself, and the resources to learn faster and interact with me on that level. We've got that group open and available. I've been sharing, I'm actually slowly building out a Garmin workout library within that group. So all of the workouts I do, I've found a plugin where I build the workouts in Garmin Connect. And by joining that group, you have access to all of the pre-built workouts that I'm putting together. And you can download them and put them in your Garmin or share them like with your clients or whatever. How they appear in a training plan. Those training plans are either available for purchase through Training Peaks, or if you're into just pre-built training plans, I do have Paddle Ninja with Johnny Puakea, Danny Ching, and Paulo Amiglio. So that's like another option. So if you don't want to be social and community-y in my Athlete Agenda group, you can literally just join Paddle Ninja and it'll deliver your training. You can follow it and you don't have to talk to me at all. And that's for the
choose your own adventure. Wow, that's incredible. And obviously all links will be in the show notes. April, I could talk for another couple of hours, but thanks so much for your time today and being such a supporter of the show as well. We've talked a bit about where we can find you. And as I said, I'll share those in the show notes, but just wishing you all the best for the season, and hopefully we'll get to meet in person in London in August.
So yeah, we should do a SUPfm
live,
maybe
or
like a clinic or something. I don't know. Let's do something.
Oh well, I certainly need it, but yeah, that sounds fantastic.
Let's organize something.
Yeah,
it'll be fun.
Let's do it. And so go well for the season. It's been fantastic talking to you. Speak soon, and I'll see you on the water.
Will do. Yay! Thank you so much. This has been fun.